Welcome to Laurel Senior Living Education. I'm Leanne Griffin, an Assisted Living Facility Administrator, Core Trainer, credentialed through the Florida Agency for Healthcare Administration. Today, we're going to look at an overview of the Food Code and Assisted Living Facilities, regulatory authorities, and application in Florida. Food service is an essential part of resident care in assisted living and is comprised of both resident nutrition and environmental health regulation. The environmental health side of food service focuses on sanitary conditions that apply to food handling, storage, and sanitation guidelines. Because environmental health regulations differ based on the number of residents an ALF is licensed to serve, it can be confusing to determine which regulation and part of the food code applies to a specific assisted living facility. This flowchart provides an overview of the regulatory chain of command that clarifies which part of regulations and the food code apply to a specific ALF. We'll begin at the left with the two statutory references here at Chapter 381, Section .006, and Chapter 429.41. Recall that statutes are written and passed by Florida's legislature, our elected officials in the Senate and the House of Representatives. Chapter 429.41 is our starting point, and it authorizes the agency and the Department of Health to write rules related to all sanitary conditions and nutritional needs of residents living in assisted living facilities. This is our jumping off point to the next statute, Chapter 381.006, and you see both Chapter 429 and Chapter 381 on the screen in front of you. Chapter 381.006 is the statute that authorizes the Department of Health to conduct their environmental health program overseeing group care facilities. Group care facilities include several group settings, including assisted living facilities, adult family care homes, and adult daycare centers. As we see from the overview flowchart, there are two administrative code sections that provide detailed policy for Chapter 381. They are 64E12 and Section 64E11 of the Florida Administrative Code. The administrative codes are written by state agencies or departments that are authorized to implement the statutes. We'll look first at Section 64E12, and my focus is on subsection .004 on screen for you now. This addresses food service, tiers, and catering. The food service regulations that govern assisted living facilities are layered into tiers based on the number of residents that an assisted living facility is licensed to care for. These tiers and their associated regulations are described here in Section 64E-12.004. I've highlighted for you the tier definition in yellow and the subsequent rule references in green. This is where we see that assisted living facilities serving 5 or fewer residents, as well as adult family care homes, must comply with the food service regulations that are codified right here in 64E-12.004. You will notice that there is a labeling and dating reference to Section 64E11 for ALFs serving 5 or fewer residents, but this section of 64E11 has been repealed and no longer exists. There are other food service regulations within the Agency for Healthcare Administration's authority that apply to all assisted living facilities, but we aren't getting into those today with this food code overview. Tier 2 ALFs are licensed to serve between 6 and 10 residents, and Tier 3 ALFs are those that are licensed to serve 11 or more residents. The regulation here points Tier 2 ALFs to certain sections of the next rule that we're going to look at, that is Section 64E11. However, the numbering for the Tier 2 rule references are different now. Food supplies, food protection, and personnel are all located at 64E11.003, paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 of the Food Hygiene Standards. So when you jump over to look at 64E11 yourself, don't let the rule numbering changes surprise you. We see here that Tier 3 ALFs are directed to and are therefore subject to all of Section 64E11, and that's where we're going to go next. Section 64E11.003, Food Hygiene Standards, is where certain parts of the United States 2013 Food Code are referenced for ALFs. I've highlighted here in green where the Food Code is referenced. For example, we see that food supplies are addressed in Parts 3.2 of the Food Code. Food Code protection is addressed in Parts 3.3 through 3.8 of the Food Code. And personnel is addressed in Parts 2.2 through 2.5 of the Food Code. Chapter 4 of the Food Code addresses food equipment, and Chapter 5 addresses sanitary facilities and controls. And we'll see in a moment later what that covers. Chapter 6 of the Food Code addresses physical aspects of the environment, and Chapter 7 addresses poisonous or toxic materials. The U.S. Food Code in and of itself is not a law or a regulation. Instead, it's a model code and a reference document for state, city, and county agencies that regulate operations such as restaurants, food vendors, and food service operations in institutions, such as schools, hospitals, assisted living facilities, nursing homes, and child care centers. The Food Code establishes practical guidelines to lessen the risk of foodborne illness outbreaks associated with food service establishments. Both Tier 2 and Tier 3 assisted living facilities are subject to the U.S. Food Code guidelines. But here again, we see a regulatory difference between the smaller Tier 2 ALFs and the Tier 3 ALFs. Section 64E11 stipulates that both Tier 2 and Tier 3 ALFs are subject to Parts 2.2 through 2.5 of the U.S. 2013 Food Code. This is part of the Food Code that addresses personnel, specifically employee health, personal cleanliness, hygienic practices, and responding to contamination events. Both Tier 2 and Tier 3 ALFs are also subject to Parts 3.2 through 3.8 of the Food Code. These sections address food supplies and protection. This is where the important time and temperature controls are found. Note, too, that the date marking referenced in Chapter 3 currently applies also to the smaller Tier 1 ALFs. since the administrative rule addressing that topic was repealed in 2018. This section of the Food Code addresses how long opened food can be kept in the refrigerator and that it must be marked with the date that the food must be consumed or thrown away. Tier 3 ALFs are also subject to all of Chapters 4 and 5 of the Food Code. Chapter 4 addresses equipment, utensils, and linens used in food service. And Chapter 5 addresses water supply, plumbing, and waste. Tier 3 ALFs are also subject to Chapters 6 and 7 of the Food Code. Chapter 6 addresses physical facilities associated with food service, and Chapter 7 addresses handling poisonous or toxic materials. You can learn more about food service environmental health by visiting the Florida Department of Health online. Food service is a critical part of resident care standards, and I hope that this overview has helped to clarify how Florida's regulatory authorities connect assisted living facilities to the U.S. Food Code. If you'd like to explore more of Laurel Senior Living Education's tools and resources, or learn more about our 26-hour ALF Administrator Core Training e-learning program, please visit us online. Thank you.